everyone, my name is Chelsea and welcome back to my channel. I have a new vlog series that I need to start. So basically, I really want to read The Science of Stephen King by Meg Hafdahl and Florence. I've had this book for a couple years now and just haven't really picked it up because it seems not exactly intimidating, but it is nonfiction. But it's also Stephen King, which I really enjoy. And I was looking at it a couple months ago and realized that I'm gonna have to make this a bigger deal than I thought it was going to be, because they do have things broken down by decade of like books, and this whole thing is different scientific looks at Stephen King's work. So like on the back it says like, how does lack of sleep affect the human body, like in insomnia? Is it possible for horrific creatures to exist like in Night Shift? What is the science behind curses and legends like in Dreamcatcher and Thinner? And so I wanted to explore this. It sounds very, very interesting, but a lot of the books that are in here I have not read. There are 30 different Stephen King books mentioned and talked about in this book here. So this vlog series is going to be me reading 30 Stephen King books and this one book by the end of 2023. I am going to be breaking it down and giving you guys a new vlog with each decade. So this video that you're watching currently is going to be the 1970s. That's the first part we have here, which means we're going to be reading Carrie, The Shining, Salem's Lot, Rage, The Stand, finally, because I have mentioned it, I think, for the last 2 or 3 years on my channel that I'm going to read The Stand. Finally going to read The Stand, and Night Shift. So in this vlog, that is what we are going to be doing. Today actually is January 1st of 2023. And I have my version of Carrie right here. I have read this one before, but it has been a while. I've also seen both of the adaptions of this and enjoyed them. So this is the first thing that I'm going to be starting actually in the year of 2023. My goal for this series is actually to read like 55 pages of Stephen King a day. More if I really, really want to, but that'll keep me on track. And then I can read other things as well. So that's just my introduction for the vlog today, because I have not started reading yet, although I have looked in Carrie and there's no chapters. It's basically just parts, and part 1 ends at page like 120, so I'm gonna have to be stopping in the middle of stuff, which is not my favorite, but we'll get through it. Hello, so I have officially finished Carrie by Stephen King. Elliot is here with me as well, and this is one that I actually finished last night. I'm going to try not to make this vlog series too long, so I'm not going to go out and about during my day necessarily. It's more just going to be about the books. This is a book that I have read before, gave it 3 stars, and I think that is still going to be my rating. So this is obviously Stephen King's first book, and I will say it does have some racism stuff in here, in the fact that like some of the characters use things that we should not be using today. There is one instance of the N-word. It is also a little bit fatphobic in the fact of how King talks about Carrie White, who is the main character in this story, but even those things aren't necessarily, she's like tilting, aren't necessarily the reason I gave it 3 stars. I think it's the storytelling aspect of this. So we actually have some narrative of like things from Carrie's perspective, things from Sue's perspective, who is a different classmate, but then we also have interjections of different like media, books and works that were published after this event happened in the story. So we have these sort of like epistolary sort of work here as well, and I don't think that personally works as well for me personally. I do like the second half of the story more. So like this has 3 parts. It has part 1, part 2, and part 3. Part 3 is very short, almost more like an epilogue. So once you get to part 2, which in this book here starts like after page 120, I really do think that is a lot stronger than the beginning of the story. We still do have the interjections, the epistolary stuff. What are you doing? But part of it is also court documents, which I liked the sort of questioning of people a little bit more, even though we knew what was going to happen, because it is interjected in the midst of like the actual action. And it's been a while since I read this one, so not my favorite of his, but also not my least favorite, because I definitely have some ones that I did not like as much. Yeah, do you see yourself? So yeah, so the next thing I'm going to be doing is actually reading the Carrie part of the Science of Stephen King. I actually have no idea what that part is about, so I will come back once I have read that. I'm wondering if it's going to be anything to do with the possibilities of telekinesis, only insofar as the fact that like that's basically what this book is about, and they do mention the telekinesis science aspect during the story.
Yep. Elliot. Presley. Elliot. Presley. Elliot.
Okay, so it's a little bit later because she had a nap, but I did end up reading the first part of the Science of Stephen King, which is this one over here. It was less than 10 pages for the Carrie section, and it wasn't as science-y as I was really expecting. It was not telekinesis. It was basically going through and mentioned some of the like themes of what the book was about, and it had like blood, and it went into menstruation a little bit, and I actually would have liked that to have been the main focus, like if we were going to be doing science stuff. But they talked about that, and then they talked about bullying, and they talked about being raised in a religious household and the good and the bad of that, because of the fact that like Carrie being raised by such a, like an evangelical, like very religious mother is part of what spurs everything on. And so less than 10 pages for touching on a lot of different topics, but not really going into the science of any of them. So I'm curious to see what is going to come next in the rest of the book for different, you know, books and chapters that they have. But when they first started with like the blood of menstruation and stuff, I actually thought that would have been a very good topic to have been like the sole topic. So we'll see. The next book that we're supposed to read, which I'm thinking I'm supposed to start tonight potentially, is The Shining. I have read The Shining before as well, although it has been a few years for that one, and so that will be the next one. Okay, so I am in the middle of The Shining by Stephen King. This is my new gorgeous editions that I hauled in my like last of the year book haul sort of thing, because I bought quite a few of them. They are UK editions, so like I had to get them from Book Depository and Waterstones and get them shipped, but I really like the covers. Like, they're just so cool. And so this is The Shining. I'm currently on page like 70. I'm actually a little bit behind for this vlog that I'm doing, but we're gonna be catching up tonight, hopefully. I gotta get the kids to bed, but at the same time, it's past 8 o'clock because they had late naps today, Presley too, so we'll see what happens with that. But I did want to stop in and talk a little bit about this book, even though I'm... Elliot wants Daddy's phone. Talk a little bit about this book, even though I know I didn't really stop and talk about Carrie in the middle of reading it, mostly because that one was actually quite quick to read, and this one's a little bit slower to get started. But this is another one that I have read previously, as I said, I think at the very beginning of when I needed to read this book. And Goodreads is saying I gave it 4-star. So far, I'm not quite feeling a 4-star, and I think part of the reason is that I'm on page 70 and they're just now like getting up to the hotel. And this is also another one that I've watched the movie, and I'm trying not to compare it to that. I'm mostly trying to read it as a book, but there's been some scenes that are in present day of like on the timeline of the story, but there's also been quite a few chapters, and long ones at that, where we're seeing flashbacks to like in the past and dealing with Jack and his drinking problem and the fact that Wendy sort of wanted to divorce him and why they didn't get divorced and all this kind of stuff, and I just don't really care as much. Like, I liked how the movie sort of makes it more concise and starts it a little bit more at, I don't want to say necessarily the action, but like at the hotel, so we know what we're getting into. And I feel like that was similar to Carrie as well. I think I remember liking the movie more than the book because it feels more concise. It feels more like it's actually during the timeline, and so it's not like, here we know who's gonna die or who's not gonna die, that kind of thing like in Carrie. This one, we don't have those, I don't even necessarily want to say foreshadowing, because Carrie was not foreshadowing, it was telling, but we don't have as many of the foreshadowing elements that way in here, so we are getting it on the timeline, but we've had a lot of flashbacks so far that are definitely slowing down the pace of this story, and so I'm okay with it so far. I'm hoping we stop getting as many flashbacks and just get into like the good meat of it, because right now, if this was like my first time reading it, I would be so confused as to why people like this story. So yeah, I think that was my only update for now, but that was something I wanted to mention just because it is very, very prevalent. Hello everyone, it's been a while since I've updated, but I am definitely getting into more of The Shining. So I'm currently on page like 341, right at part 5, and I will have to say that like after I talked to you guys last, I was getting a little bit like, hey, we really didn't need a lot of these like flashbacks. Yeah, flashbacks. We haven't had as many flashback things. We've had a little bit more remembering of certain things instead of flashbacking and having whole chapters on like Jack's previous work and stuff. And I still don't think they were necessarily necessary at the beginning. Like, I'm sure they rounded out some of his character and things like that. But once we actually got to the hotel, which is sort of where I ended with you guys last time, we definitely got more of the more sinister nature. We got a lot of like what The Shining actually means, which I really appreciated. I didn't remember that from my last reread because it's been years since I read it. So my basis of going off on this book was more the movie, because I feel like I've watched the movie more recently than I had reread the book. And so I really appreciated that we get a lot more of The Shining. We get a lot more of like actually what Danny can do or can't do and what that means for the hotel and everything than you get in the movie, which is very much appreciated. Like, I'm so into those parts. And the sort of like more horror aspects are very creepy. There's not an overt like goriness to it necessarily. There's not a whole bunch of descriptions that way, but there is a very sinister, unsettling feeling that I'm absolutely loving. So this is a book that I previously gave 4 stars, and I feel like that's probably a very accurate result. We'll see as I continue. I should actually be finishing this book since I have like this much left tomorrow, I think. I have not read for today yet, but today and tomorrow is probably how long it's going to take, and so I'm very excited to continue and finish with this one, and that actually makes me even more excited for the sequel, because like when that first came out, I wasn't entirely sure if I wanted to read it or not. Spoiler alert for later in this video series, it is a book that's actually on the list to read for this stuff, so I will be reading Dr. Sleep, and I'm actually quite excited for it now. Okay, so I have officially finished The Shining for I think the second time. I think this is like my first reread, my second time through the book. I think I'm upping my rating to a 4.5 stars. I don't think I can go to a full 5, although like as we get into the story, like as I was saying the last time I updated you guys, we're really getting into it. I love the fact that this goes into more of the Shining in detail, not just like what you see in the movie. You get a lot more of like those little details. We jump back and forth mostly from Jack's point of view and from Danny's point of view. We get a couple little other things as well, but like I absolutely loved the way this ended. Like, so much more than the movie. I've always heard that Stephen King doesn't really like the Shining movie, and I can completely see why. Like, it's a choice. I like the movie. I remember really enjoying it like when I've watched it, because I've watched that one a few times, but this ending is so much better. Like, so much better. I will say we did get some racist stuff, some N-words in here, starting around page 340 something, so like quite a ways in. I was very pleasantly surprised through most of it that we weren't getting too many problematic elements, but then certain things start to pop up that way, and some of it is very much because of how horrific the hotel is supposed to be. Other parts are not, and I felt some of them were unnecessary. What are you doing? We got a new mat on the floor for Elliot. There's Presley, he's been playing on it. Elliot's over here actually joining us. But yeah, I really liked the way that this ended. But because of how slow it was to start, with a lot of those flashback sort of things that I don't think really actually needed to be in here, I think those could have all been cut down much more, or even completely, and we still would have gotten the sinister vibes and everything going on with this. Because of that, and because of some of the racist N-words and all that kind of stuff that I know some of them are supposed to make you uncomfortable because of the hotel and stuff, but then other ones I didn't feel like were necessary because they weren't actually part of that horror storyline. They were just sort of included, that sort of thing. I can't give it a full 5. It's a 4.5, but like pleasantly surprised with my reread. Although I knew I was gonna like this one because of the fact that I gave it a 4 last time, I think I like it even more. And so now the next order of business is to read the Shining chapter of this one, The Science of Stephen King. That's the whole point of this vlog series. So I'm going to be reading that, hopefully right now, and then I will get back to you guys. Very, very easy to read. This was about 8 pages total for this chapter. And one thing I really appreciated about this chapter is they did end up doing like a sort of Q&A for most of it, like 4.5 pages out of the 8, with a crisis counselor who talked a lot about mental illness and alcoholism, because those are the 2 big themes in The Shining that Jack is dealing with. And I really appreciated the sort of questions that they had, and like, how is this related to real life? How is the portrayal? Are these certain things that people could maybe understand and empathize with, that sort of thing? And so that was the main part of the chapter that was hit upon in this one. So for The Shining, it was the mental illness and alcoholism specifically, especially. So I did appreciate that, and that those were the most important, I guess, themes of the book that they were looking at scientifically, compared to the one about Carrie, which I thought went a little bit all over the place and wasn't as scientific. So this one I did appreciate the Q&A with somebody who was like qualified to do that. Okay, so I'm back a few days later than I should be, because I do need to start reading this, and I'm a little bit behind, but that's because we ended up going up to the snow and everything, and I wasn't planning on bringing this with me, and then we had to come back and unpack and all this kind of stuff, and I just haven't picked it up yet. We're going to stop the excuses here. The next book on the list is Salem's Lot. Now this is one I have not read before, and this one is quite chunky. It doesn't fully look like it because it looks like around the same amount of pages as The Shining. However, this one has thinner pages. It looks like once you get past like 700 and something pages, this type of book from the Hodor and Stutton one that I've been getting from the UK, like these kinds that I just absolutely love, they end up with thinner paper so that it's not as thick. So we'll see how that goes. Like, it's not as thick of a page, so it looks very similar to the like almost 500 page book that was The Shining, but this one's 730 something. So yeah, and I know nothing about this one except for I'm pretty sure this is the vampire one, especially since at the bottom it says, "Do you believe in vampires?" So yeah, this is our next one. Never read this one before, so it'll be an experience. I've just started Salem's Lot recently. Like, I was reading it last night, got to 100 and something pages in, which is good because I'm a little bit behind on where I should be for this. And as I mentioned before, this is one that I have not read before, so I don't know like anything that is happening. It starts off very vague, and then we sort of jump into what happened previously is what it sounds like. It sounds like we're sort of going into the past and getting to see what happened. It got a little bit like the last chapter that I read, or the last part that I read, because there are chapters, but then those are also broken down a little bit into parts. It was going through like one whole day, almost hour by hour, with different people around town. And it was very interesting that way because I don't know exactly what we were going through with the different people. And some of the stuff that happened was a little bit more gruesome, and I don't know if it was necessarily necessary for that part of the story. And like, some of it obviously was there because it's sort of like an apprehensive, like, what is going on sort of feeling, but we did have a dead dog, and it was a very gruesome way to look at it. And then we also had some child abuse that, again, I don't know if that's a reason into the story, like what we're gonna see is based on that kind of stuff, or if it was just to set a very like dark tone. So we'll have to see, because I definitely want to read more of this today, because it says, "Do you believe in vampires?" So I'm hoping we get some paranormal elements. Okay guys, so it has been quite a while since I've actually updated this, and that's because I'm way behind on Salem's Lot. It's actually January 31st. I should have finished this a few days ago at least, and read a couple other things, small things, you know what I mean? But like I am behind. So part of it is that I was needing to finish other TBR things, and then part of it is that I just don't really know about this story. It has such high ratings for some Stephen King stuff on Goodreads and everything like that, but it's just not really doing it for me. I think part of it is because it's literally vampires. I was expecting more, like up until we got, you know, to almost like page 300, we weren't entirely sure what it was going to be. I was waiting to see exactly what we were getting into. It's vampires. And part of this book is sort of the vampire element, but a lot of it is the town, Salem's Lot. And the thing about it is, I feel like we're getting pulled out of the actual more paranormal, I wouldn't even say it's horror elements, the paranormal elements to go about town business. But then like when characters are pulled in together to like make this group, I understand that a little bit, but did we need everybody else in this town? Like we've gotten so many chapters about people that I don't care about, like I couldn't care any less about them. I'm currently on page 470 out of like 760 something, so like I have less than 300 pages to go. I'm hoping to finish this today. Truthfully, if I wasn't reading this for this type of vlog, I would probably DNF it. Like I'm just not into this kind of story. But also we just got to, I think part 3, was it part 3 of this? Yeah, part 3. We just got to part 3, and part 3 introduces, like when it comes in, it introduces the fact that like Salem's Lot is basically dead and people don't know about it, and the whole beginning of that is introducing like, oh, this character is actually a vampire, and this character is actually a vampire, and this character is actually a vampire, and like they go on and on and on. Half of these characters, I don't remember who they're supposed to be. Most of them, we never got why they're vampires. Like, so in this, we can sort of tell, like from the boy that's missing at the very beginning of the story, he was going to visit a friend, and so that friend is now like in the whole like vampire slaying business that they're going about. And it's because we got to see that like that friend came to him as a vampire. And so we're getting little bits of that. So like some of these characters know people and we know how they got turned. Like it starts off a very mysterious, and that's why I was hoping it was more than just, oh, we have vampires. But no, it's vampires. And I was just, I don't know, hoping for more. It's the type of story that's taking way too long to be told, because we keep stopping and getting to know about the town. But also, I feel like the writing style isn't bad, it's just not the story for me. Like, I'm not saying that this is necessarily a bad one because it has so many good ratings. But the other thing I did want to mention is that these are the books from the 1970s. Obviously, that's what we're doing in this vlog. And there are quite a few slurs and problematic elements in these books. Like I talked about the Carrie ones and the Shining ones quite often. This one, like I said, does have some like child abuse, infant child abuse, and it's very hard to read. And there was a couple other instances of things that were in a more sexual nature that I didn't think needed to be that way. But I don't know if it's because it's one of the longer books that I've read so far or the one that I haven't read previously. But I do feel like the problematic elements and the slurs and stuff are not really present as much as in the other ones. There are still some elements that are very like, I feel like they're put in here to try to make it feel more like a horror than just like a paranormal sort of thing, but it's not being thrown in my face currently as much as the other two, so I am appreciative of that. But like I said, I still have like 300 pages to go. I think my app is saying that it should take me about 3 hours to read it. Like I'm almost at 100 pages an hour. And so I did read some more this morning during Elliot's first nap. She actually has a cold, so she probably will end up taking maybe 3 naps today. She's at the fence of like 2 naps to 3 naps. But because she has a cold, the last couple days she has been taking 3 naps. So I'm hoping to read a couple more times today and then finish it up tonight. But this is probably going to be one of the lowest books that I've read in January. Even though this vlog's not going to come out like in January because I still have some other stuff to read. But yeah, I don't know, I'm disappointed in this one. I was expecting more, especially for it being such a chunker of a book. Okay, so I did finish this last night. I thought I had like 250 pages left once I actually like looked at it. I was on page like 5 something, like 514-ish, something like that. And this book has 768 pages. So I was like, okay, I have like 250 pages left. My Bookly app said I had 2 hours and 45 minutes left to read. And I had like 2.5 hours left before midnight when it would turn February. It took me 50 minutes because this book has over 100 pages of deleted scenes. And the thing is, I hated this book, so I did not read the deleted scenes. I'm giving this book 2 stars because I did finish it. The epilogue was like page 500 and something, and then there was like an after thing, and then there were letters about this town from like the 1800s. I will say I skimmed those because by that time I was like, I don't care. The epilogue could have been the end. The after thing was semi-interesting, but like we didn't necessarily need it. And then the letters, like I was out by that point, you know what I mean? So I was like, okay, whatever. This book is just vampires, but not even that, not even interesting vampires. It's literally just about the town, and I just couldn't care less. Like, I did not like how long it took to get to the point. I'm not even entirely sure what the point was. I will also say, because I forgot to mention it last time, because it's about vampires, and like vampires are afraid of crosses and all this stuff, it gets very into the Catholic religion and things like that. They keep talking about God and all this kind of stuff, and I just really didn't need that to be a major focus of this book. Like, sure, some people like this, I didn't really. And then also I talked to you guys last time about how this didn't have as many problematic elements, or at least it didn't feel like that because the book was so gosh darn long. As soon as I finished saying that, the next thing I read was very misogynistic, so you know, great. Yeah, I just did not like this one. I finished that last night. I then also actually read the Salem's Lot part in here, The Science of Stephen King. This one, I don't know. The very beginning of it was trying to talk about how one of the authors ended up taking a like horror literature class, and how this was supposed to be like rural gothic or something, and then they eventually get into like consumption, and the thing is they barely touch on that. Like, I wish that would have actually been the science part. Like, this passage for Salem's Lot didn't feel sciencey at all. Like, I really sort of wish they would have touched into it. Like, there was one part in one of the asides, like it's not even like part of the main thing that they were talking about, but like there's a very, very short aside that says, since there are 900 calories per liter of blood and 5 liters in a human, a vampire would have to drain 1 person a day in order to survive. That's interesting. Go on about how you would actually have to scientifically survive as a vampire. Like, that's sort of what I would want from something like this. Like, tell me how much calories are in blood, how you would have to survive. Maybe talk about the people that are allergic to sunlight and how that could also be a thing. But no, we get a barely touched upon thing about consumption. I don't know, I just wish it was a little bit more. Elliot's talking. Now, it is February the 1st. I was supposed to finish that one before, and then the next one I'm going to read, I should have finished in January as well, but we're gonna read it today. I'm planning on reading it today. I'm actually gonna go over here to my Stephen King shelves because I need my thrifted edition of the Bachman books for our next read. So our next read is Rage, which is something that he wrote as Richard Bachman, and it's in this collection. It has Rage, The Long Walk, Road Work, and The Running Man. I'm pretty sure I've read The Long Walk and The Running Man. I don't think I've read Road Work. That was hard to say. Read Road Work. I'm not sure if I ever really want to. Like, I have these very pretty rainbow editions of Stephen King right now, and they have a Bachman's book version, which does not contain Rage. From my understanding, Rage is no longer allowed to be published because it is dealing with, I believe, a school shooting. So Rage is like no longer allowed to be published. You have to get it in something like this. This is a collection that I got used back when I was in college, so it's been at least 10 years, and I have never read Rage, so we're going to read that one today. I don't know anything else about it except for you're not allowed to publish it anymore, so I'm hoping to finish it today. Okay everyone, it's February 2nd and I did actually read Rage in one night, like I said I was going to. This is probably like the worst book I've ever read. Like, I want to give it 1 star, and I'm going to. The thing is, I usually reserve that rating in my stats for things that I DNF. Truthfully, if I wasn't going to read it for this, I would have DNF'd it. I probably would never have even started it. But this is just not good. First of all, it does say at the very beginning, like in the author's notes stuff, I didn't really read all those, but I did skim them. But it does mention that Rage and one of the other books in this collection, I think The Long Walk, are like some of the earliest things that he had ever written. Like, before Carrie was even published, those were written like way back then. So even though this was published in like the 1970s, it was probably written in at least the 60s, maybe earlier. Like, it's older. And you can definitely tell with the writing style, it is just not good. It's very blunt sentences, nothing with much variation. Like, I just really didn't like the writing style. And I mean, he can be long-winded at times, and even in this 124-page story, it is long-winded sometimes, but the writing was just not good. And then I had some real issues with the overall story, which is probably why it is out of print. I did hear that the reason it's out of print is partially Stephen King himself. Like, he's like, people don't need to read this story. It's not something that is good for everything else. But basically it follows a high school student who, for himself, claims that he is, you know, troubled, insane, all this kind of stuff, which I don't want to really go into the ableism of that, but like, we don't even really get a real explanation for stuff. But he just decides to go to school one day and kill a couple teachers and take a class hostage. And from there, the students really listen to him, and they're sort of on his side through most of it. And I don't even really know why we're getting into that. He tries to blame his parents for stuff, and yes, there is some crazy stuff that he hears in here. There are a couple different slurs in here. It's just lots of passing the blame almost, but like every kid in this class is on his side. Like, they're not even like really hostages. Like, they're just like sort of like, oh yeah, like, let's do this sort of thing. But it just like worse and worse the more you look at it. There's one point in time where he has a couple girls in the class basically get into a slap fight to solve an argument, and then as soon as that is done, he basically is just like, hey, look, boobs. Like, he's just like, everything is very sort of like put to bodies. Like, they talk a lot about sex and all this kind of stuff, and then they talk a lot about like abuse and this kind of stuff. Like, there's a lot of things going on, but it's sort of framed in a way that it makes sense of why he came in and killed some teachers and took a class hostage. Like, it shouldn't make sense. Like, there should be no sense that they're trying to put to it, but they do. But also, this was written in probably like the 1960s. It is set in the 60s or 70s, and I don't know if it's just like the political climate now, but you can tell that our main character is a white person because of the fact that, like, literally they have proof that he has killed people. He has brought a gun to school. He has killed people. And the entire time the police and people are trying to talk with him, it is all like, we want to work with you. We want to figure out where we went wrong and where you're going wrong. And we don't want to shoot you. We don't want to hurt you. We want you to just come out and be a nice boy again. And it's just like so ridiculous that that is the argument being made here. Like, don't get me into all of that. It's crazy. But yeah, so like, not only is this not well written, the actual content of it is not great whatsoever. It is very much white boy taking his class hostage, and people not wanting to actually like have him have punishments for it. Like, literally, the other thing that gets me, I'm probably spoiling most of this story because I just do not give a shit. My battery died. But the thing that gets me about this is that they mention the fact that this is not like the first instance of this for this kid. This is the first time he brought a gun to school, but just the month before that, he brought a wrench to school and literally beat his teacher over the head with it so bad that he had to go into surgery and might not have survived. He did, but like, literally, we open up with like him having to go to the principal's office and be told like, hey, we have finally come to a decision about what we're gonna do about the fact that you tried to kill your teacher. And then after that, it goes into him actually killing 2 other teachers and taking a class of 24 students hostage. There's also a part in here where we're supposed to, I guess, empathize with him, which I don't, but these students do. And there's one other student that by the end of the novel is like lambasted for being different. And the thing is, I cannot figure out why it's supposed to be that way, except for the fact that this one student is the only sane one in class and is the only one trying to be like, he just killed people, we shouldn't be on his side. And everybody like hates him for it. Like, there's no other reasoning that I can see. There's no other subcontext that I can see. And so I'm just like, I don't understand it. Like, this is one of the worst books I have ever read. Like I said, not even just because of content, although it was horrible. Also because of writing style. It was just not good. So that means the next thing I need to do is read the part for Rage in here. I have no idea what they're going to talk about because he never had like a formal diagnosis of anything to include like, oh yeah, he was insane or whatever it was, although they tried that. So yeah, we'll have to see what the actual science part is. So yeah, so it has been a little while, but I did actually end up reading the Rage part in The Science of Stephen King. It talks a little bit about school shootings and how like back when this was written, it didn't really have that very much, and so there is, you know, a little bit more of a disconnect than reading it now, you know, that kind of thing. And it does also mention the whole Stephen King is the one that pulled that book off. I was glad they didn't go into like the mental illness or whatever our main character has, because I don't think it was delved into at all. And with the way that stuff was written, he didn't actually seem like he had a diagnosable thing. He just wanted to cause problems. And then since then, I have started The Stand. I'm actually on page 196, I think, which is actually not that great. I should be farther along in my whole, like, what I was planning on doing for this one. But I think what I'm planning on doing is actually finishing the other book I'm reading at the same time as this, and then try and knock out as much of this as I can before I want to do a reading vlog in the month of February. Reading a whole bunch of romances. So, yes. The one thing I will say for this, so much better already than the last few things that I have read from Stephen King. I understand, even though I'm not that far into it compared to like how big this book actually is, I understand why people like this one. It started off so strongly with a husband that like is like a military man rushing home to get his wife and daughter out of bed so they can try and beat whatever the heck is going on. We then learn it is some sort of like weird strain, manufactured strain even, of like flu that is like super deadly. But like the actual vibes of this, the suspenseful times of this is very well done. It talks a lot about how quickly communicable it was, and I'm very curious to see, because we've gotten now a few different point of view characters. Like, are these the characters that might potentially be immune? Is it not? Because there is at least one person that's from like, not like the downside of like the very beginning of like, here was like, what am I trying to say? Ground zero of this event, but like in the event of that first guy who was saving his wife, the military man, he goes and they drive like states away, I'm pretty sure, and they eventually get found by like these older people at a gas station, and they're basically dead, and that's how people get the disease, and then it travels from there. But there's one guy left from that initial like exposure after the military compound, who seems to be fine. So I'm feeling like, and again, this is all conjecture because like even though I am almost 200 pages in, this is 1,100 pages. Like, it's not anywhere close to being done. My conjecture is that I'm pretty sure some of these people, in some way, shape, or form, are probably immune, and they're going to be like the sole survivor of that area, or whatever it is. And it does say, I think in the synopsis of this one, that it talks about, you know, a plague or a virus and this kind of stuff, and the aftermath for it. So I'm very curious to keep going in this one. It is very long, but I'm really, really liking it a whole lot more than a lot of the other stuff. Also, because this is the 1,150 something page one, this is the Barnes & Noble Classic Edition. It's actually really, really pretty. This is like the updated, revised one, including extra scenes that he wrote originally and then put back in. And this was originally written in the 70s, which is why we're reading it now. But it was updated in the 80s or 90s, I think the 90s. And so I guess the original book was set in the future, like the 80s, even though it was written in the 70s. And this one was updated and it's set in the 90s. I was a little bit confused about that, but because it's the updated edition, apparently he went back in and updated pop culture references or little things like that to be more of the times, but then still set it in a future time for when it was updated. So now it's in our past, obviously, but I thought that was interesting.
It's very much a product of its time in some of the language choices. And I know you can't necessarily gripe on a whole bunch of language choices in some of these books, especially Stephen King books that are like so old, because this is just a product of its time. So like in the part that I was reading, we have quite a few mentions of the R word, but this was written originally in the 70s. I don't know what parts were added into the story. And so even though it is very uncomfortable, very like we don't say that now, the fact that that was something that was written in either the 70s or the 90s or both, like I can't say that it was something that people back then would have known as a slur. And so even though it is very uncomfortable, like it's part of that time period. I do mention it because I'm doing like a Stephen King vlog for stuff. Like I do want to mention those kind of things because there are some stuff that is mentioned and the way that it's talked about is obviously not appropriate, but for the time period, you can't really get away with it.
I have the stand here and it's February 27th. I took a break from reading Stephen King, The Stand specifically, because that's the one I'm currently on, to read romance during the week of February 14th, Valentine's Day, for the rom-comathon, that kind of thing. And I have a little less than 400 pages left. I have almost 6 hours of reading left. Like it's like 5:49, something like that. I'm hoping to get this done before the end of February because I'm one of those people that like does not like to be in the middle of books in between months. But I'm on book 2 of The Stand. I think the last time I left you guys off was the end of book 1 going into book 2, and we've now gotten people like in the same vicinity, which she just pulled up on the couch, which is something that we were not doing really in book 1. It was a lot of very isolated people, but the atmosphere for the like actual pandemic sort of thing that they had going on, I liked that. I liked the sort of devastation that it had, that kind of thing. And then at the end of book 1 going into book 2, they introduce this like dark figure, this dark man that people dream about, and now we're sort of in this like commentary, this like battle between like good and evil, God and the devil, I don't know, but it's feeling very religious, and it's partly because the like sort of leader of the good side is like leaning into it that way. She is very godly and thinks that this is sort of what's going on. But also we just had a long part of them trying to figure out the governing system of the survivors that are on this like good side and theocracy, and like should they use the Declaration of Independence and the Bill of Rights and all this kind of thing. And I'm like, I don't care. I really liked the first book, that kind of thing. I liked the sort of more desperate parts of it, with these people almost being like sole survivors of the areas that they were in and dealing with hello, the like actual virus and that kind of thing. But it has now moved out of a sort of like sci-fi dystopian feel to a more like religious fantasy. I don't actually know how to classify it anymore. It's not horror, which I know a lot of the Stephen King books that I've read before, I would classify them as that. It's just gotten a lot more long-winded than I feel like it needs to be. And there is a lot, like I said, about like governing and government and like how do we make a society, and I wish I could speed past those parts even quicker, because I know I'm still like 100 pages or so, maybe a little bit more, from where book 3 is going to start, and then from book 3 to the end I'm pretty sure is like maybe 200 something, 300 something pages. So like I'm getting to that point, and I'm hoping there is a tone shift at that point, because I was really liking the beginning of the book, but not so much later on. So yeah. Okay, I did finish this like 1 hour before it turned March, like 11 p.m. at night on February 28th. I finished this. I think I want to give it like 3 stars. It's just like the first book of this was so much better. The atmosphere was so much better. The like dystopian nature of like the virus and all this kind of stuff, and like having so many people die and having so few people left, like I loved that aspect of it. But then we get into book 2, and then even as we continued into book 3, where it's just mostly focused on like good versus evil, God versus the devil, people trying to make a government, and then like getting into book 3 is like sort of what happened for like the fight against stuff, and it was so anticlimactic. I just didn't care at that point about any of the characters, like even characters that died, and there were so many characters that I felt could have been better served in the story in other ways. I just didn't like that aspect. Like I'm so torn about this, because like at the beginning I was like, of course I understand why people love this book, and then it lost me. It completely lost me. One thing I will say is I'm starting to get hints of like different things in Stephen King's writing, where things pop up every so often. Like in here they mention like, I think like a Schwinn bicycle, and they mentioned that I think in Salem's Lot, and I know they mention it in It, like that kind of stuff. Or they mention The Shine in this one, which was obviously a big point of The Shining, because it was mentioned in the same way. The way that some people have the shine and they just sort of know things, that kind of thing. So I'm liking that aspect, especially because I think it's, what is it? The Dark Tower series is sort of like a Stephen King like universe, like different people show up in his books, that kind of thing. And they mentioned Castle Rock at one point in this book, and I haven't read any of that kind of stuff, but like I like that idea where you can sort of see those little bits and pieces show up every so often in his stuff. So yeah, I finished this behemoth, but I was hoping to like it more, which means obviously the next thing that we will need to do is read the Stand part of the Science of Stephen King. So hopefully I will update you guys later today, tomorrow, just depending on when I actually find time to read, so that we can get into this part. Okay, so I did end up reading this actually a couple days ago, and I just haven't come back to update you guys. The Stand part of this, in like complete opposition of the actual The Stand, was like 3 pages, which I think is one of the shortest chapters I've read in this one so far, whereas The Stand is the longest one that we will be reading for this project, like at all. It was talking about pandemic stuff, which I do think was appropriate for the book. This actually was written around 2020 even, so the fact that they did mention that pandemic as well, I did think was, again, appropriate. The only thing is I wish it went into more depth, because it touched on multiple different pandemics, and when you're only getting into 3 pages worth of it, it didn't feel sciencey enough. Like it talked about people trying to do smallpox, it talked about the 1918 flu, it talked about coronavirus, it talked about quite a few different ones, and I just wish that there was actually a little bit more, you know what I mean? Besides that, I've also started reading Night Shift, which is our last book actually for this vlog here. We will be continuing in the Science of Stephen King and doing all the other decades that they have in there, but this is our last one for the 1970s, and this is a short story collection. So far I'm almost 200 pages in. I've read, ooh, how many pages, how many stories? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I've read 6 stories so far in here. The first one is Jerusalem's, I can't speak today. The first one is Jerusalem's Lot, which is the letters that are actually at the back of Salem's Lot that obviously I read for this vlog here. I did actually not read the letters last time because by the time I finished Salem's Lot, I was done. 100% done with that book. And the letters that are in there obviously were published in here, and I think for the newer like publication of Salem's Lot, they put them in that one. So I liked them better in here than at the back of Salem's Lot because I did not want to keep reading at that point. They weren't anything amazing, but it wasn't bad. Then we had Graveyard Shift. Yes, Graveyard Shift. That one is about like a clothing plant with like rats and stuff. It was okay. We had Night Surf. Night Surf is actually directly related to The Stand, and I liked that aspect of it. However, the main character in it is just blatantly fat phobic in such a way that he's literally like, oh my gosh, this girl is fat, I hate her. And so that was not fun. But then we started getting into some ones that I really did enjoy after the sort of slow start to this series of stories. We got I Am the Doorway, which is like a sci-fi astronaut horror with like weird placement of eyes and stuff. I actually really enjoyed that one. We also had The Mangler, which is like about a possessed laundry folder. I liked that one too. It was a little bit weird, but like I liked it. And then the last one I just read was The Boogeyman, which was about a boogeyman. Very, very creepy premise. Like I really liked the horror aspect of it. However, it is problematic in any way that you can assume. Sexist, racist, fatphobic, homophobic, like anything that you can think of, the main character in there said something bad about that kind of stuff. Like every single thing that you could imagine. Every single thing. I think transphobic and everything too. Like literally anything that you can think of bad was mentioned in that chapter. And I don't know why, because it wasn't like mentioned in such a way as like we should hate this person. But they also mention not exactly child abuse, but like it's the boogeyman. Obviously kids are related to the boogeyman sort of thing. Like it's more a child fear than an adult fear. And so keep that in mind. But yeah, I really liked the premise of it. I liked how creepy that was, but I didn't appreciate how problematic it was as well. But that means I am excited to continue reading in this because I'm about a third of the way through, because those last 3 stories I really did appreciate for the horror aspects. And so I'm hoping the rest of them sort of hold up in that vein, like more horrific, more entertaining, versus the ones that are at the beginning where I'm just sort of like okay with them. So we'll see. I'm also curious if this is going to be one of those short story collections where they all, bless you, connect at the end or not. But yeah, okay. I think that's the update for now. Gotta read more short stories to continue this vlog. Okay, so I have read more in Night Shift. We're almost to the end, and it's taking me a little bit longer than I wanted, but like that's because I'm on my period and I'm just like tired. But I wanted to update on some stories because I have definitely read more than the first 6 that we were talking about before. I'm actually gonna put you guys on a book that we got recently. Presley's doing puzzles in the background, and that's why he's very, very happy because he loves puzzles. But yeah, so more stories in here. I wanted to just sort of sit because we talked about like up through the boogeyman last time, and I've read 8 more stories, have 6 more to go. So the next one in this was Gray Matter, which was actually different than what I assumed, because I just assumed gray matter like brain stuff. It's not. It was very sort of disgusting, and I loved it actually. We also got Battleground, which was sort of campy and reminded me of the movie Small Soldiers, which I have not watched in years, so I could be sort of mistaken, but like that's what it reminded me of. We also had Trucks, which is the basis for Maximum Overdrive, the movie that Stephen King directed. I know that one's supposed to not be a good movie, but I remember watching it way back when, who knows when, and loving it. And so the fact that that was what it basically was, I mean, obviously smaller because it's a short story, but like that's basically what it was. I liked that one a lot. And then the last ones that I've been reading have just been like sort of okay. We have Sometimes They Come Back, which is sort of a ghosty, undead sort of one. I didn't fully understand the point of that one. We had Strawberry Spring, which is more about like people dying at this college. And again, I wished it was a little bit more explained. Like I was hoping for a little bit more. We had The Ledge. That one was sort of interesting because it is literally about this guy having to walk along a ledge of a building for reasons. And then we had The Lawnmower Man, which was a little bit fat phobic and stuff. Like I didn't think it necessarily needed to be like, oh, well, this is a fat guy and this is why he's doing this, and it was like ended up turning out bad. But otherwise, just sort of fantastical, not really like horror. And then we had Quitters Inc., which is the last one that I just finished reading. That one was sort of interesting as well. It's about a guy trying to stop smoking, trying to quit smoking. And that one had some very negative talk about a child being disabled in like a mental way, and it comes out of left field. And it's one of those things like, yes, these were written in the 70s. Some of these things are things that are talked about. Like I know they use the R word sometimes. I actually don't even remember if they use that in here, but they do like in The Stand, like because it is a very common thing that was talked about at that time. But the thing that really got me about it is the first time that we hear about the child who has this in this one is this guy talking about how he wants to quit smoking, and like they ask him like, do you have a wife? And he's like, yes, I do. And they're like, do you have a kid? And he said like 1, and then in his mind he thinks it should only count for half because he's not all there. And I just like, it breaks my heart that way, you know. Like I don't have to like people using the R word in older books because it is a thing of the times. Like it is something that shows up even though now we know it's wrong, we don't use that. But for some of the thinking of some of these characters, and I don't know how much of that is like these characters aren't very nice people, because a lot of the times when that stuff pops up, they aren't. But also it does make you question a little bit like how much is also the author's perspective. And again, this is from like the 70s. There's been plenty of years in between that and now. But that is something to keep an eye on, I guess, if you're trying to read these. But otherwise, so far so good. I'm liking some of the stories much more than I thought. Other ones are pretty good, especially since I'm not usually the biggest short story reader. So I'm planning on finishing this soon, hopefully tonight, because then I also do have The Science of Stephen King for this one. I have literally no idea what that one's even going to be about because there are multiple short stories. Like, are they going to focus on one story in this collection? Are they going to pick something more broad? I have no idea. Okay, I think we have a little bit of background noise because my computer is exporting a video, and it's my new computer, which the fan's a little bit louder than before, but it is so much more powerful, so like, I'm not gonna complain about that. I finished night shift. So, let's just sort of talk about the last few stories on here before I give it a rating. So we ended last time at Quitters Inc. No. Yes? No. Do I even remember where we finished? Yes, I think pretty sure I talked about how that was like about quitting smoking. The next one was I Know What You Need, which I did actually really like. It was very creepy, but in a different way than everything else. So I did like that one a lot. After that is Children of the Corn, which I know there's movie adaptations of a lot of Stephen King's work. I've never watched this one. I really liked that one as well. I didn't even know what to expect except for creepy children and corn. Exactly. But yeah, I liked that one. The next one after that was The Last Rung on the Ladder, That one I don't even think is necessarily what I would classify as horror, but again, I really enjoyed the vibes of it, like a lot. And then we had The Man Who Loved Flowers. I wish there was a little bit more in that one. It was just okay for me. The next one was One for the Road, which I skimmed over in this one because it actually was, again, at the end of Salem's Lot as an extra story. I read it in that one, and I do remember liking it well enough, but by the time I finished Salem's Lot and then read the extra stuff that was in the back, that one I think actually was before The Letters, which, you know, was the first story in here, and I liked it well enough. It was creepy. I liked that it was in the back of Salem's Lot. However, I didn't like Salem's Lot, and so it felt like it took forever, and I didn't care as much by the end, but I did like the short story. And then the last one was The Woman in the Room, and for that one, again, the vibes aren't necessarily horror, but I definitely felt like the despair of them, and I thought it was still pretty well done. Not my favorite, but pretty well done. So overall, I think I'm giving this collection 4 stars. Like, I was a little surprised at how much I liked a lot of these, because the last few Stephen Kings that I've been reading for this vlog here, the 1970s, were sort of missing and not hits. Like, you know, oh, it's like a hit or miss. No, they were misses. Most of them were misses. And so the fact that most of the stories in here I actually would have rated, like, by itself, like 4 or 5 stars, I'm very happy with it. So yes, then, because I'm on top of the ball, I did also read the Night Shift part in the Science of Stephen King. They only focused on 2 stories. They focused on Quitters Anonymous and Gray Matter. So Gray Matter is one that I probably would have rated like 5 stars. It was very gross, and I liked that. And here they focused on beer making and fungi a little bit. So I was not entirely expecting that from this, but then when they got into Quitters Anonymous, they did talk about smoking addiction, that kind of thing, as well as some torture methods because of, you know, the concept, because of the content of that short story. And so those were the only 2 things they talked about for Night Shift, which I guess was pretty good. But I was expecting more, maybe. I don't know. So far, the science in the Science of Stephen King, I was hoping for a little bit more science, more than personal anecdotes, because that's sort of how it feels like sometimes. But that is the 1970s. Now, I am going to rate them just because I feel like we should have a baseline for, like, what is my Stephen King reading taste, especially with the 1970s. And I think what we might do is, as we further go in through this vlog series, add more things to the ranking, because why not? Why not? And so I think for this one, we read 6 things in the 1970s. I'm gonna go from my least favorite to my favorite. So we will have like a top 6 so far, a rating 1 through 6 of these books, and then like as we go through, we'll add the 1980s, 90s, 2000s, 2010s, etc. So my least favorite book, hopefully you guys could tell by how I've talked about a lot of these, was Rage. I just did not like that one at all. My next least favorite was Salem's Lot. Just very underwhelming and boring for me. Like, I was really hoping for more. My next one after that might surprise people. It's The Stand, and it's because I rated it 3 stars, and my one after that, so my third favorite, I guess, of this vlog was Carrie. I also rated that 3 stars, but The Stand is over 1,000 pages, and yes, Carrie is much easier to read and devour and understand. And the part that I liked of The Stand, so like book 1 of The Stand was like 400 pages basically. That is more than what Carrie is, and I really liked book 1 way more than Carrie, but the fact that The Stand is so much longer than just those 400 pages, I'm gonna have to rate it like this. Based on what I rated it, how my feelings are, and how easy it was to read, The Stand is going to be at number 4, Carrie is going to be at number 3, number 2 is going to be Night Shift. I really did like that short story collection, and so at number 1, hopefully no surprise to anybody, it's The Shining. I mean, I gave that one 4.5 stars. It was almost perfect except for a couple things that I just felt were a little bit boring and unnecessary and like deviated from like the actual horrorness of it, like at the beginning of the book, but I really liked that one. a lot, and I like it more than the movie and everything too, so that definitely helps. It definitely proves to me that I like that book. I know that I'm going to title this vlog, and actually probably the vlog series, The Best of Stephen King, mostly because I didn't want you guys to know that I was actually reading them because of the science of Stephen King while I'm filming this. Do I think these are his best books? No. Do I know that there's going to be books later on that we're going to read that are going to be even better than the ones that I just read? Yes, of course. But are there probably going to be worse ones too? Yeah, probably. Also, there are books that I know I personally have read before from Stephen King and absolutely loved that aren't in the science of Stephen King, so we're not reading them, and because I love them, I would rate them much higher than some of the ones that we just read too. But yeah, if you've read any of these books from the 1970s, how did you like them? Let me know if my opinion differs from yours. Like, am I right? Am I wrong? Hello. I know this is obviously opinion-based, but I feel like some of the ratings that I gave these books vary a lot from what a lot of other people on Goodreads have rated these books, The Stand, and other things. So I'm just curious what you guys think. So that is going to be it. I will have another video coming out hopefully soon with the 1980s by Stephen King. So if you like this video, give it a thumbs up to let me know. Subscribe to this channel if you'd like to see more videos. I do have videos coming out on Tuesdays and Thursdays, so I will see you then. Bye.